created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. At what point do I just say, God, I don't have it all understood, and I haven't figured it all out, and I don't know a lot about systematic theology, and I don't know a lot about science and all stuff, but I trust in you, and I'm going to rest in you, and I'm going to sit in you and understand that it's because of you that I can even be here today. But to all who have received him, those who believe in his name, he has given the right to become God's children. The Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we have seen his glory.
I feel like I should quack. I actually could do my whole time talking like Donald Duck, but that would probably be super annoying. Thanks. I'm so glad I get a chance to talk to you today. It's kind of funny. I used to be the Pastor Bill. Now I'm a Pastor Bill, and I love that. I have to tell you how much I enjoy that. I love this church. I love that Pastor Bill is my pastor now. Not this Pastor Bill, but like the other pastor. It gets very confusing with Pastor Bills around here. But I get to talk to you. I get to close off the Gospel of John, and I get to talk to you about this very, very cool story. I love how the Gospel of John ends. It's different than how the other Gospels end. So if you look at the other Gospels, you have Matthew. Remember how Matthew ends? Matthew ends, right, with the Great Commission. You know, where Jesus is with all of them, and he says, listen, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, and I pass it on to you. Therefore, go. Wherever you go, as you're going, make disciples. And he kind of, gives them some instructions with that. The Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Luke ends with the ascension. Okay, so, we looked at the resurrection of Jesus. Okay, so Jesus rose from the dead, appeared to all of his disciples. He appeared just to them as a group, about 3 times. And then he appeared to lots of other people. In fact, in one passage, it talks about how he appeared to hundreds of people at one time. But it ends with the ascension. The ascension was like 40 days after the resurrection. So Mark and Luke end with Jesus' time on earth after the resurrection and just before he ascends into heaven. And this is like, the scene is literally Jesus is there talking to him, and then Jesus kind of ascends. He kind of floats up. That would be awesome to see, wouldn't it? But he tells them this. He says, listen, go out now and preach the good news of the kingdom of God. And wherever you go, I'll give you miraculous signs. So he was saying to them, go and talk, preach, but I'm going to give you these miraculous signs that are it's almost like another language to the heart. When people are healed, when there are miraculous signs, it kind of reinforces this gospel of Jesus. Okay, so we have all these 3 kind of end this way. The Gospel of John ends with this very personal story. And what I'd love you to do is we kind of look at this story. If you would do something, a little bit of something that Bill talked about last week. Remember when Bill was talking about how John the apostle kept inserting himself into the story? Remember that? Like he was the apostle that Jesus loved. If you would, while we're going through this, could you insert you into this story as the person that Jesus loves? You're not writing it, but I think this story is for all of us. And I think what's contained here speaks to all of us. So this is not just a thing for Peter and Jesus. This is a thing for us. This kind of gives you, a real life example of what happens when faith goes to the next step, or when belief goes to the next step. I'm a big believer in our faith. It kind of grows. Okay? And I think it grows in ways that we're unaware of. But there are times in all of our lives, isn't there, where something happens, there's some encounter with God. It might be an encounter with a person, but like in your head, you're realizing, oh man, this is God. And we kind of jump in our belief. Sometimes God does that so that we can jump past things that block us, or that we feel disqualify us. Sometimes it's like belief that helps us jump into having more confidence in what God might be calling us to do. So this is a kind of every man's story in that. So let me kind of get started with it. Again, I kind of love how this gospel ends. This is the last chapter, and I'll just read a part of it for you. This is the Gospel of John, chapter 21. It says, "Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. 'I'm going out to fish,' Peter said. And then they all said, 'Well, okay, we'll go with you.' So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but his disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. And he called out to them, 'Friends, you got any fish? Haven't you any fish?' 'No,' they answered. And he said, 'Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some.' And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, 'It is the Lord.' And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, 'It is the Lord,' he wrapped his outer garment around, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, just about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread." Let me stop right there. So let's kind of take a look at what's happening here. So this says afterwards. So this is after his previous appearance just to the disciples, just to the gang of 12. It says after that, Jesus appeared again by the Sea of Galilee. So there's 7 of them that are out there. They've left Jerusalem. They're now in Galilee. And so Peter says, "I'm going fishing." And 7 others go, "Okay, let's go along with you." Now, what's kind of interesting about this is there's not a real record of Peter doing a lot of fishing since Jesus called him and said, "Come follow me." And you kind of wonder, boy, of all the things that you'd be doing now after the resurrection of Jesus and all the things you'd learned from Jesus, why would you go out fishing? And there's lots of commentators have all kinds of different reasons why. Personally, for me, I think Peter just wanted to do something he was good at. I think Peter kind of was trying to figure all this out, and he had kind of his own baggage that I think he was kind of carrying along with him. And so he was looking for something that brought him comfort, that was okay to do. Don't we do that sometimes? It's like, I got to do something I know I'm good at, because I don't seem to be good at some of these other things. It's kind of a really natural, it's kind of a cool thing for him. I don't think he was trying to bail on anything Jesus was asking him to do. That's what some commentators write, that Peter was trying to remove himself because he, for different reasons. But I just think he wanted to do something he was successful at. So the other guys were like, "Hey, we know how to do that too, so let's go." So they go out and you'd fish at night. There's 7 of them in this boat, and they didn't catch anything the whole time that they were out. That's kind of unusual, to be out all night, especially in the Sea of Galilee, and not catch any fish. But they didn't. And so there's this little voice from the shore. They weren't too far away. This voice from the shore says, "Hey, did you guys catch anything? You got any fish?" And they're like, "No." And he says, "Well, throw your net on the other side." Well, that's kind of a weird thing, isn't it? I mean, because it's a boat. You would think, because it was a huge haul of fish, that 7 fishermen, one of them would have noticed that there was fish on the other side. Right? But who knows how those fish got there? Again, lots of speculation. Jesus could see the fish. Jesus was the leader of fish and sent all the fish over there. There's a lot of things that people write about this. Whatever it is, they throw it over and they get this big haul. And then it says that John, the disciple whom Jesus loves, realizes that's Jesus on the shore. Peter, pulls up his clothes. He had kind of taken off his upper garment probably, and put it down, and he wraps it around himself, jumps in, swims to shore. We don't know why he decided to do that. Remember Bill's story from last week? John outran Peter to the tomb, so maybe this is Peter saying, I'm going to swim because I can swim faster than you can row. He kind of beelines it there. And when they get there, there's Jesus. Now, here's what I think is one of the very cool things about this story. This is super reminiscent of how Peter met Jesus. So if you go back into the Gospels, the way that Peter meets Jesus is, again, at the shore. Jesus was there. He was teaching. And there was all these people. So there was this huge crowd of people. And as the crowd grew, people started to kind of inch up, closer and closer to Jesus. And Jesus was kind of backing up, and he was right at the water line there. And so he looks over at this fisherman who, it says, had fished all night and they hadn't caught anything. And he looks at him, he says, hey, can you pull your boat out and let me stand in the boat so that I can preach to this group of people? And the guy says, oh, okay. And he rows out, and what was kind of cool about that is he's now captive. He's like a captive listener to everything that Jesus is saying to this crowd of people. Before, maybe he was kind of detached. He was just trying to clean up and get home because he was tired. But now he's right there. And when it says when Jesus finished preaching, he said, hey, row on out, and let's see if we can catch some fish. And Peter said to him, I was fishing all night. I didn't catch anything. And Jesus says back, well, let's give it a shot. So he rows out a little ways, and the end of that part of the story is he catches a net full of fish. And I kind of look at this now. This is years later, 3 years plus a touch maybe, where Jesus, it's the same reenactment. It's almost like Jesus is saying, you know what? I'm going to take you back to a place that you remember, so that I can help you move forward to the next place. Isn't that awesome that God does that? God does that in our lives too. God does that where he kind of takes you back to a memory or to a situation, or you find yourself doing something that you remember doing, you go, oh, I met Jesus here. Or, oh, I overcame this here. Oh, this happened here. God is so good with meeting us at the place that we're most comfortable at times, but meeting us for sure at whatever place we're at. One of the things with Peter, if you remember, was, not 40-ish days earlier, Peter was up in the upper room at the Last Supper. Remember the story of the Last Supper? And he's up there, and Jesus says, someone's going to betray me, and Peter was like, I'll die for you. And then it was just not 24 hours later that Jesus had been arrested, and Peter was in this little outer court area where Jesus was inside this temple, and somebody said, hey, I know you. Aren't you one of the guys that hung out with Jesus? And he's like, nope, not me. I didn't do that. And then he gets asked again, I think I saw you with Jesus. And he goes, no, I don't know the guy. And then there was a third time. Somebody said, were you the guy? And he goes, no, I wasn't. So Peter, in typical Peter fashion, he's an emotional guy, gets it wrong again. Peter could be known in the Gospels as the apostle that got it wrong most of the time. He was the guy that's like, yeah, like, oh, nope, wrong yeah. But he didn't get the right yeahs, but he got some of those wrong yeahs. That's why I love the story of Peter. I love Peter. I know in my life, I've gotten it wrong so many times. And I love how God would always meet me there. In my head, and kind of what I was raised growing up is you need to get out of there and get to where you should be so that God could meet you there. But God always meets you wherever you're at. Isn't that cool? What an awesome God that is. So he meets him here, and who knows what's going through Peter's head. It was the Lord. You probably already had the conversation. It was like, dude, I'm so sorry that I know I betrayed you. You probably heard that. I'm sorry, and I'm sure Jesus, forgave him. But, even when you feel the forgiveness of God, do you sometimes hold on to that? Have you ever done that? Anybody ever done that? I know that God's forgiven me, but man, I screwed up so badly. I don't understand how he can. And so since I can't comprehend that with how I feel, then I can't move forward in it. Maybe Peter's at this place. So kind of goes on, verse 10. Jesus says to them when they all get there, hey, bring me some of the fish that you just caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and he dragged the net ashore. It was full of fish, 153 fish. But even with so many, the net was not torn. I think it's interesting that they talked about the net. I'm still trying to figure out how Peter pulled up a net with 153 fish. But that's the story. He did. Jesus said to them, come on, let's have breakfast. And none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. And that, again, kind of an interesting part. It's kind of like they know it's Jesus, but you're like, I don't know why he's here. I don't want to address him. I don't know what to say. This is like things used to be, but not. They used to do these kinds of things. They fished before they met Jesus. They hung out with Jesus. They ate with Jesus. But it's different now because Jesus rose from the dead and he met with them. And they're kind of in this kind of awkward place where we don't know what's next. We don't know what we're supposed to do now. And then, we get this second part of the story, which this part of it, if you would, we kind of tend to look at these things and think this is this is the commissioning of Peter, and, Peter's going to go out and be an apostle. He's going to get it finally, and he's going to be a pastor, and this is like a passage for pastors, but it's not. It's a passage for people. It's a passage for us. The things that he says to Peter are not a thing, at least this first part of it, are not just for Peter. They're for us. And it's a really powerful encounter that he has with him. So verse 15, it starts off and he says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. And again Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Now, let's kind of take a look at that because there's some kind of interesting stuff, that you probably would pick up if you spoke the language that they spoke. So, and some of you have probably heard this kind of this interplay between two words in Greek that mean love. So you have the one word, agapeo, or agape, is what we're kind of used to. And that, for the church, it meant the kind of love that God had for all things that were created and us, and that we share with the world around us. So whenever agape, was used, the church would know that meant, oh, that's God's love. That's the kind of love that God has for everything. And then the other word there is phileo. And that was the word for brotherly love. In the city of Philadelphia, that was the word that kind of meant, you're my bro. I love you. I'm right there with you. And you see this interplay, and it's kind of interesting. The different kind of views as to what they mean. I used to believe one, and I've kind of shifted over time. But let me show you this. So it says here, when they had finished, Jesus said to him, Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Now, the word that Jesus is using there is the word for agape. Okay, so he's using this Greek word. Now, catch this. So the meaning that we have, the agape signifying God's love, that we share, he shares with us and we share with the world, that wasn't developed yet at this time. Okay, and that's kind of important, to get what Jesus is trying to say to him. That at this time was just a Greek word for loving humanity, loving people around you. In Latin, they translated that word to charity. And it's the word for loving people, loving, caring for people. And that's what it meant at that time. It didn't have this God context yet, because that was developed. And that's important, because people, as they've kind of looked at this, have tried to make this like this interplay between Jesus and Peter, like, Peter, you don't love the right kind of love. You don't love enough. And Peter, this idea of, I love you like a brother, that was so important to him. But Jesus, he says to him, do you love me more than these? So again, some commentators kind of say that you're sitting there with 6 others, and Jesus said, you love me more than these guys? You can believe that. That's just weird to me. I don't get Jesus going, you love me more than these guys sitting right here with us right now that are listening? That doesn't jive. And then others have said, he was kind of pointing out, to where the boat and the nets were. He said, would you love me more than these? And he meant, you love me more than fishing? I don't think that was it either. I think when he said, you love me more than these, he's talking about everything. You love me more than these. You love me more than this world. You love me more than all that's happening right now. All of us have a these. All of us have a, do you love me more than these? You can kind of fill in what yours is. But we all have that, do you love me more than these? And Jesus is kind of coaxing him here. He's kind of saying, if you love me more than these, then this is what you do. It's this he's kind of at this moment of belief for him saying, Peter, this is what we're going to focus on now. We all hit that place where God in our lives say, fill in your name. Bill, this is what we're going to concentrate on now. This is what I have for you. All of us grow in that, and it always grows towards a deeper relationship with God and a greater love for people, sharing the gospel with people, and taking care of people. It always grows in that direction. When I first became a Christian, it was in 1971. I was a sophomore in high school. And like many high schoolers, sorry high schoolers, this might not be you, I was a train wreck. I was into all kinds of stuff. It was, the 1960s and 70s in Southern California. So, did you ever watch those movies? They're true. I was right in that. I had hair down to past my shoulders. I wore all the clothes. I listened to the music. I did all the extracurricular stuff, that was a part of that. Everybody that I knew did that. This was my friends. We all did this together and didn't see anything wrong with it. And through a series of difficult events where my life was really starting to spin now, and into things that really, truly weren't good. Through another story, another time, I ended up in this church, and the pastor was talking about sin, which you wouldn't think would dent somebody, in that place. But in his messages, I kind of came to this place of like, wow, you're talking about me. That's me. And I gave my life to Christ. This was during the Jesus movement in the 1960s and 1970s. And in that moment of belief, just so many things changed in my life. Almost all of those things that were the extracurricular activities ended that day with like no desire to go back to them. And I just found my life shifted from those things to really wanting to serve God. I remember, praying in our high school group, Lord, I just want to serve you. Like, what do you want me to do? I was like so anxious, like I'll do anything. And really honestly, like a lot of things that I think he brought my way, I was like still saying, I'll do anything. And I didn't grab those. Because I was growing in my faith and in my level of belief that gives us power, it activates us in it. So many times, I think this is a misunderstanding in Christianity. There's this, we're kind of led down this road of our own efforts, and We have to choose to do the next level of faith. You have to choose to do these things. And yeah, I think there's a component of choice in that. But I think that, like in this story, there's this encounter with God where he says, do you love me more than these? What will you do with me next? Where will you go with me next? And it comes in all kinds of different ways. And in that, there's this grace and this power to do it, not just on our own efforts or commitment or conviction or, those are all good things, but we need these encounters with God. And he gives them to us. This is one of the things I love. I went to college, worked full-time through college to pay for college, became an electrician. I loved being an electrician in Southern California. For a while, I was building condos on the beach in Southern California. So during lunch, I'd go surf, and then come back in. I had a great life. And the church that I was going to, Marcia and I were going to, asked if I would come on staff as the worship pastor. I'd never thought. I wasn't even that good a worship leader, I didn't think. Why would you want me to be the worship pastor? I never once thought of the idea of becoming a pastor. Ever. Not on my radar screen. Didn't want it. Pastoring is a tough job, and people don't like pastors. So they're not always nice to them. And I always kind of thought, I don't know, I don't want any more people not to be nice to me. So pastoring just didn't hit the list. But that's where I ended up. And it was this moment where I had to say, okay, yeah. And there's these moments that God moves us to, not always into pastoring, but always into a deeper love with him and a greater commitment and action to others. Always. It always works in that way, even though we can't always grab it. So that was the these I think he's talking about. So he says, do you love me? That's agape love. And Peter responds, yes, Lord, I phileo. I love you like a brother. You know that I love you like a brother. I think this is really important for Peter here because his last encounters with Jesus before the resurrection didn't go great. Like he just didn't get it. Jesus was saying, we're going to go to Jerusalem and, there I'm going to be crucified. He's like, no, don't go. And Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. What a bummer of a moment that had to be, right? I've never heard actually Jesus say to me, get behind me, Satan. That freaked me out. He had the situation with the sword. He had the denying Jesus. And I think Peter's at this place of feeling, like really deeply feeling, man, I've messed up so bad. You ask me if I love you. I love you with my whole heart. You're my bro. I'm like right there for you. He loved him with the kind of love that he thought was the love that showed that he loved Jesus the most. And that's why he's like, I don't know about this caring for the world, but I know I love you. That's how I'm responding. I love you. Man, that's us again, isn't it? We have this relationship with Jesus. It's so personal. And it's so wonderful. And for some, God has done so much in our life. And, it kind of narrows into like, it's just you and me, bro. And I know Jesus is always trying to expand that to, well, if it's you and me, then it's you and me and them. It'll always be, the deeper we grow in our love with Jesus, you and me and them. And that's why Jesus says to him, all right then, feed my lambs. And again he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answers, yes, Lord, I love you, phileo love. You know how much I'm committed to you. Jesus says, take care of my sheep. Notice how Jesus is pointing them out? Not just pointing them to him, because he knows that. Peter is accurate. I mean, he's not doing anything wrong. He's not buying into the mission. He's at this personal place of, Jesus, I need you to know how much I love you. And Jesus is saying, great, then do this. And then he gets to the third time. This third time, he says to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? But this time it's interesting. Jesus uses the word phileo. He goes, listen, do you love me then? Like a brother? Another cool part, I think. Because it's almost as if Jesus said, all right, you're not getting this, so I'll meet you here. You're at the place of trying to let me know how much you love me, phileo, brotherly love. Then I'll meet you right there. I love you like a brother too. I understand you love me like that brother. If you love me like that brother, and then he gets to the third one. He says, then it says to him again, so feed my sheep. So yes, feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. You see the picture there? It's not just a give them something of value to nourish them. It's care for them. And again, I don't think this is just a Peter. And this is not just an apostle thing. And it certainly isn't like a pastor thing that it may have turned into. This is a people thing. This is what God is calling us all to do. There's a couple of reasons I know that, but I'll give you one big one. One big reason that I know that is because when God created the earth, so in Genesis, right? Remember that creation story? And he creates mankind, and that's Adam and Eve, and as he creates them, he says to them, go out and have dominion over everything. Now, because that word dominion, the King James kind of version uses that, people kind of interpret that as you have just go be the boss of everything. That's not at all what that word means. Not at all. That's a really specific word. It's only used one other time in the Old Testament. And it really speaks to go out and minister to, represent me to all of creation. Humans, animals, everything. Rocks, mountains, rivers. This is all I put this under your care to represent me and to minister in such a way, and I love this kind of phrase. This is from one of the big lexicon books, that you are helping them grow into their highest created potential, which is what Jesus does, to help us grow into all that he created us to be. And here, he says to them, it's kind of the same thing. I want you now, and not you as the apostle or you as the future pastor, but you as a person, and us, and me as a person, to take care of all that God created, to take care of his sheep, to feed them, to care for them. He's bringing them back to this place, that the mandate that humanity was created for, which is to love and care for everybody. Because ultimately, through that, people really begin to see the hand of God. They begin to see, the beauty of Jesus and a relationship with Jesus. They come to a level place for some where needs are taken care of, and where instead of being rejected, they're accepted. Instead of being hurt, they're healed. We are in a place, and I have no doubt that there are people right here today that are at a Peter place of thinking, my life is such a train wreck. How could God love me? Or maybe you've had just enough Christianity, just enough spoken to you where it's like, I know that God loves me no matter what I do. I know that. I know that God loves me and he accepts me, but the difficulty is that you don't accept you, that you can't forgive you, that you can't see that love of God, and here is calling to Peter, is so much a part of your life that whatever stands in the way right now will not stand in the way in the future. It won't. And I've seen it over and over. I've experienced it over and over. It isn't the fixing what you do wrong. It is the accepting that next level of belief and just taking the steps into it. And that's what he's calling Peter into. Here's this beautiful kind of, it's interesting, he kind of switches up the metaphor. It used to be about fishing, now it's about sheep. I don't know if he did that. It's like, I got to get you to stop thinking about fishing. So I'll hit you with some sheep stuff. You can grab hold of that. But it's this call into his life. And he says to him, Jesus says, feed my sheep. Verse 18, very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, and he says this to all of us, no matter where you're at, no matter the condition of your life, no matter the place of your heart, he says, "Follow me." I love that. I don't know a lot of people, like when I mess up and mess up bad, people scatter. You know, have you ever experienced that? It's like they're like, "We don't know how to help you, so good luck." You know, but God never does. And this is this guy who's got so much wrong. He's the one that he singles out. And he says, "Do you love me? Feed my sheep. You love me? Take care of my sheep. You love me? Feed my lambs." And then he tells a story about him. This is a weird story, isn't it? Like, I don't know that it kind of takes this turn. And he goes, "Listen, one day," and he talks about what ultimately is, Peter's death. This is kind of interesting because this gospel, the Gospel of John, was written, in like the 60-something AD is when we have the first little pieces of it, but it's completed by 90 AD. So we have little pieces of it kind of show up in references from other letters that we have. That other people say, Peter taught this, or Peter sent this letter with this little bit in it. But the whole gospel would have finished in 90 AD. Peter died in 64 AD. And what's so interesting about this is John's writing this word that Jesus gave him, and he knew it happened. He knew what happened. Peter was in Rome, and he was leading a couple churches in Rome, not just one, but there were a few. He was kind of giving them some oversight and helping them out. And Nero was the emperor, and Nero was a hideous guy. Just talk about the list of bad emperors. This guy was terrible. And something had happened in Rome, and he blamed all the Christians for it. And so for a number of period of time, we don't know if it was almost a year or more than a year, they would arrest Christians and they would execute them in like a public execution. And this was his way of, trying to deflect some blame for stuff. And one of the people that they arrested was Peter. And so they knew who Peter was, and they said, "Hey, listen, you're so into this thing, your method of execution is we're gonna crucify you like we crucified Jesus." And Peter's response was, "I'm not worthy to be crucified like Jesus. Like, no, man, don't do that." And so they said to him, "All right, then, we'll just crucify you upside down then. How do you like that?" And he said, "Okay." And that's a part of what he accepted. And so this passage where it says, when you're young, you're going to be out and about and doing all these things, but when you're older, you're going to be led and dressed and tied up. He was referring, I think, to his death, where he was imprisoned, and they took his clothes off, and they put other kinds on that just made it worse. And his stretching out of hands, you might think, was him being arrested, but it was actually stretching out his hands to be put on this cross. How those two things go together is remarkable, isn't it? That Jesus goes from, "Do you love me? Feed my sheep," to, "This is how you're going to die." And he gives them this picture. I just want you to understand, it's not going to be easy, Peter. And Peter still does it. He still says, "Okay, let's go." He follows him. In fact, this interesting how John ends almost as the handoff to Acts. Where John is like, he's the main character, in the first almost half of the book of Acts, with all the things and the way he preached the gospel and healed people. And he just kind of took all this and went, "Here we go." And it was because God brought him to this place of deeper belief. We have the same kind of things. Let me share this. This is from later on in Peter's life. So Peter is an apostle. He had gone to a number of different places. He was in Rome a couple of different times. Ends up in Rome, and he writes a couple of letters. And in his first letter, he writes this: "You should greatly rejoice in what is waiting for you. Even if now, for a little while, you have to suffer various trials. Suffering tests your faith, which is more valuable than gold. Remember that gold, although it is perishable, is tested by fire. So that if it is found genuine," and here it's like if you are found genuine in this, "you can receive praise and honor and glory when Jesus, the anointed, our liberating King, is revealed at last." Now look at what this guy grew into. This is kind of awesome. He went from the guy's like, "Yeah, I'll take you out in my boat," to the guy that seemed to get, it was a wrong response almost all the way through the Gospels, from the guy who rejects Jesus after he said that he would die for him, to this moment where Jesus says, "Do you love me? Take care of people. Feed my sheep." To now he's writing and he says, "You should greatly rejoice in what is waiting for you." All of us. And it's not always going to be easy. And sometimes that's the thing that bumps us off the road. We run into some difficult, truly difficult, I'm not trying to minimize it, painful sometimes, just like hard rock in the road, some barrier that we don't feel that we could get past. And I've rarely seen people on their own efforts get past those. Sometimes they just change into other things. But there's this work that Jesus does in our life in belief, in faith, that shows us how to move past those things. And they begin to have this really refining work. So it's not just crappy stuff that happens. It's stuff that happens that is used by God in our life to refine it. So if you know much about gold, they dig it out of the ground, right? When they dig it out, it's not ever just a big hunk of gold. It's mixed with all kinds of stuff. So they'll heat it up till it becomes a liquid almost, and then all the other stuff that's not as valuable as gold kind of bubbles up to the surface. Okay, and then somebody skims that off. They'll heat it up again. More will bubble up to the surface, and they skim that off. So that gold, the valuable 24-karat gold, is super valuable. But it's all gold, not the other stuff. And that's what God does in our life sometimes. He may not be the initiator of the fire, but he'll always use the fire. Not exclusively, but if it's there, he always uses it. And if we can get to that place, like Peter, that had gone through so much, to say, "Listen, man, when I go through stuff, when we go through stuff, let God bubble up those things that are less than." The impurities were things that were not nearly as valuable. They were not important. They didn't add anything to that gold. And that's why they'd take it off that top layer. And why? And I love this part. Test your faith. Yeah, got it. So it becomes a pure kind of love and devotion to God. I kind of got that. And although it's still perishable, I understand that. But he says so that it's found genuine, so that you can receive praise and honor and glory when Jesus the anointed, our liberating King, is revealed at last. Okay, so this kind of points to this time where Jesus comes back. He kind of comes back in some kind of, like real person, you can touch it kind of flesh, almost like with the resurrection. He says, when that time comes, for those that endured through it, you went through the fire and that they were skimmed off. You didn't bail along the way. You didn't reduce your love to, it's just me, I'm just focused on me and Jesus. But you loved his sheep. You realize that the love that he was calling you to is an agape love. It's the kind of love that goes just beyond the "you're my bro and I love you, I'll do anything for you," like we're tight. It goes to, I'm going to take the love that you give me, which is so different, and I want to share it with everybody. And that's in more than just words. We are living in a culture and a society right now where people are desperate. for care. People are desperate for kind words. People are desperate for generosity. People are desperate for help. They're everywhere. And what he's saying is, if you love me, part of that love is care for all of them. And it's just everywhere. And Peter spent his life, after that you just see him like from person to person. In fact, one of the first ones in the book of Acts is him healing somebody who desperately needed healing. And that's what he calls us to. That's what today I'd like to remind you of. Not in a scolding kind of way. You don't feel that from me, do you? Because it's like we're all in this one together. But in a empowering. But be empowered by God. Seek these moments, and when they come, recognize them. Like Peter. They could go, when he says, follow me, we know his response, though not written, it was lived, was, I'm in. Where are we going? What are we doing? How are we going to do it? And that's how he spent his life. And that's what God calls all of us to, in our own context, in our own environment, in our own ways. Not as pastors. Pastoring is just one way of doing that. But there's all kinds of other ways with the people around you, the communities you live in, the friends that you have in school or at work. It says, share this. Take care of them. Because I think a part of what Jesus wants us to get from this story is the greatest expression of loving God is taking that love and sharing it with others, using it to care for other people. And it's just powerful. And so can I pray for you for that? I kind of wrap up. Is that you in with me on this one? Okay. First, though, as I'm praying for that, I want to start with praying for anybody that's here that feels like I messed up too much. Or anybody that's here that feels like, I don't know enough. Like, that sounds great, but I just don't know how to do that. If anything that is kind of this barrier, can I pray for that first? Because I think those are the moments of where we kind of grow in our faith. Those are the moments of belief, where we go, all right, I don't know how. I don't know how I'm going to get past this, but I'll just start. And let me see where it takes me. Let me pray for that first. Lord, I pray for anybody that's here today that along the way maybe disqualified themselves from really being able to be your hands and feet and be your mouthpiece. Share the things that they've learned about you. Lord, if they've disqualified themselves, remind them again that you didn't, because you don't. Never have. Never will. That you did not. And you understand that they still do. And Lord, I just pray you meet them in a moment of intense belief that lifts that off of them. Lord, this is something we need your healing power for. It's kind of beyond our own capabilities. It's not a matter of will or determination, but it's deep. Lord, I pray you bring that out for anybody that's here with that. They feel not qualified, like I'm in, but I don't know nothing. Then, Lord, I pray that you would just say, okay, that's all right, I do. Let's go together. And that they would take those steps. And, Lord, I pray for your church. I pray that we would be the church that is known as a place that loves God so much and shares it with everybody. Not just with each other, which is great, but shares it with everybody, that we would be, and the church would be, the people that care most especially for the ones that nobody else will. Lord, you seem to gravitate to those people, so we'd love to start there and kind of move, outward to other people as well. But Lord, I pray in this story that you help us all to see ourselves as the ones that you say, do you love me? And as we respond, we do, yes. That we hear from you, then feed my sheep. And I ask this all in your holy name. Amen. All right. Hey, thanks for letting me talk to you today. I always love doing that. I love the Gospel of John's a good story. So God bless you. You all have a great week. Bye-bye.
thank you for being a part of service here at Oasis Church.
Here at Oasis, we present Jesus to those who don't know him and pursue him with those who do.
We believe that being part of a local Jesus-centered church is good for your soul and your family. Here are a few ways to get connected.
To stay connected, visit The Hub, your connection point. You can use the QR code on the seat in front of you or go to oasischurchhub.com.
We would love to get to know you and your family. Please fill out a Connect card. You can do this by going to oasischurchhub.com or by stopping by the Hub in the atrium.
We're able to do what we do here at Oasis because of the faithful generosity of those of you who tithe and give on a regular basis. And if you'd like to participate and give toward the vision here at Oasis Church, you can do so by grabbing the tithing envelope in the back of the chair in front of you.
We're so glad you joined us today, and we can't wait to see you next week.